Your Honor, at this time, we, the defense, would like to call Dr. Jamie Carlisle to the stand.
Would you agree right here? You swear to tell the whole truth, what you're about to say? Be seated.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening. Please state your name for the record.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Jamie Carlisle.
And Dr. Carlisle, as you're speaking today, could you please hold the microphone close to you so that we can all hear you?
I'll hold it the whole time.
Thank you. How old are you, Dr. Carlisle?
I'm 52.
Where do you currently reside?
I live here in downtown Central City.
What is your education?
I got my dual Bachelor's of Science degree in biology and chemistry. I then went on to the Wetmore School of Medicine, where I obtained my MD. I focused primarily in cell biology and genetics.
What, if anything, was the focus of your studies in graduate school?
Primarily drug treatments and inheritable diseases. I'm sort of a nerd for that sort of thing.
What, if anything, is your current occupation?
So I, alongside Kane Matthews, operate Star Labs, which is a scientific research facility here in Central City. Personally, I've been a scientist there for about 22 years now.
What, if anything, do you do in your role as a scientist at Star Labs?
We do a ton of really fascinating cutting edge research. We have a large medical pharmaceutical practice. My focus is primarily on the genetic side of things.
And what, if any, professional goals do you have in your role as a scientist at Star Labs?
I've always wanted to cure inheritable diseases.
What, if any, new drugs were you researching and developing as a scientist at Star Labs?
I was the lead on the research and development of OCAMA5. It's a new drug treatment. The idea is that it cures cancer in the host patient and then also prevents them from passing it on to future generations.
What would the process be to administer OCAMA5 to a cancer patient if it was approved?
So if it were approved, the first step is an extraction of cancerous cell DNA from an individual. At that point, we inject the OCAMA5 drug into the extracted sample. It essentially rewrites the DNA and it basically takes out the cancerous portion. We then re-inject the DNA back into the individual and then it stops it from being passed down.
Would this happen in one injection?
Definitely not. Rome wasn't built in a day, so to speak. This would be a series of re-injections back into the body over time.
Is there anything documenting your progress during the development of OCAMA5?
Yes, there's a few things. Star Labs generates periodic reports on the research that we do, and then I independently take data entries as well.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 2. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Let the record reflect that I have handed the witness Exhibit 2. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is Star Labs laboratory study synopsis for OCAMA5.
How do you recognize it to be that?
It's entitled the lab study synopsis of OCAMA5. It has Star Labs right on the title, and I'm familiar with the findings of this study because, again, I created the drug and led the study process.
Was this document kept in the ordinary course of your business at Star Labs?
Yes, as I said, Star Labs generates these reports regularly.
Is it the regular practice of your business at Star Labs to make such records?
Yes, it is.
How close in time was this document created to the events recorded?
So this study period was concluded in June of 22. This study report was generated shortly thereafter.
Was this record made with a person with knowledge of the events recorded?
Yes.
Are you familiar with these records yourself?
Yes, again, I created and led this program, so I'm familiar with everything within this.
Your Honor, at this, I offer Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Any objection? All right, that's admitted.
May I publish a true and accurate copy to the jury?
Yes, you may.
May I approach the jury at this time to do so?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Carlisle, according to the lab study synopsis, what was the title of the study conducted at Star Labs?
Observational study of the OCAMA-5 effect on cancerous cell removal from DNA.
How many investigators assisted with the studies of OCAMA 5 at Star Labs?
There were 14 licensed analysts on the project.
What was the study period covered by the lab study synopsis?
So this began in March of 2018 and it concluded in June of 2022. I've been working on OCAMA 5 for 8 years, so this study period reflects a portion of that time.
According to the laboratory study synopsis and from your own personal experience, what were some of your objectives in conducting this study?
Sure. So primarily, we wanted to evaluate the efficacy and the safety of OCAMA 5.
Were there any secondary objectives in conducting this study?
We were also looking out for any adverse side effects of the drug treatment. We understood that no matter how effective it is, if it's unsafe, we were never going to administer it to anyone.
Would you say that you were primarily concerned with safety first?
Definitely. That's why we listed it right in the primary objectives.
And during the over 4-year period covered by the lab studies synopsis, how many study reports did Star Labs conduct for OCAMA 5?
In total, there were 492. It was a lot.
And according to the lab studies synopsis and from your own personal experience, what was the process of administering OCAMA 5 to patients?
So as I discussed earlier, first, it's an extraction of cancerous cell DNA from the patient. Then we integrate OCAMA 5 into that sample. Then we re-inject the sample back into the patient over a course of injections.
And what were the results of this lab study synopsis?
So there was signs of decrease in cancerous cell growth in 73% of the studies. And then of that 73%, 78% were producing continuous cancerous cell reduction. So these were really positive results.
Thank you, Dr. Carlisle. Is there anything else documenting your process of OCAMA 5 throughout this period?
Yes, so in my capacity as an employee at Star Labs, I created independent data logs as well.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 4C for identification purposes. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Let the record reflect that I'm handing the witness what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 4C. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is my data log entry from July 21st of 2022.
How do you recognize it to be that?
It has the date and my name and the title data log in the top left-hand corner. And I wrote this document, so I recognize it.
Was this document kept in the ordinary course of your business at Star Labs?
Yes, it was.
Is it the regular practice of your business at Star Labs to make such records?
Yes, it is.
How close in time was this document created to the events recorded therein?
I believe I had previously entered another data log just a few days prior, so this was within a couple of days of the events in question.
Was the record made by a person with knowledge of the events recorded?
Definitely.
Are you familiar with these records yourself on this day?
Yes, again, I wrote this document, so I'm familiar.
Thank you, Dr. Carlisle. Your Honor, at this, I offer Exhibit 4C into evidence.
Objection.
No objection as to foundation, Your Honor. I simply just ask that all parts of Exhibit 4 be entered. This exhibit consists of 4 parts, 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. And for completeness on the record, I would just request that all of the other parts of this exhibit be entered in as well.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Briefly.
Rule 106 does pertain to the rule of completeness. However, case law does indicate that the introduction of writings made at different time periods do not have to be admitted at the same time as they pertain to different things in each writing.
All right. Well, I'm going to overrule the objection. If on cross, if you want to introduce the other documents, you can do that as well. I assume there'll be no objections at that time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, may I publish a true and accurate copy to the jury at this time?
Yes, you may.
Dr. Carlisle, you stated that this data log entry is from July 21st. Looking at the lab studies report contained in Exhibit 2 and your data log in Exhibit 4C, how would you compare the timeline between those two documents?
So my data log was made more recently. It was July 21st of 2022, whereas the study synopsis, that study period concluded in June of 2022.
Dr. Carlisle, according to your data entry in Exhibit 4C and from your own personal experience, what were the results of your studies for OCAMA 5 on July 21st, 2022?
So I was really pleased with these results. There was no new cancer cell growth halfway through this test, no concerns with DNA reintegration, no noticeable clotting, no DNA splicing errors. These were really satisfactory results.
And according to the document and from your own personal experience, by July 21st of 2022, how many years had you been working on creating OCAMA5?
At that point, it'd been 8 years. You have to be patient. These things take time.
Did you ever apply for FDA approval for OCAMA5?
Yes, that would have been the morning of July 26th. I submitted our application.
What prompted you to submit your application to the FDA on the morning of July 26th?
By that point, we were reaching FDA efficacy levels to qualify us to apply for clinical trial approval. And as I just stated, my data log had showed that by that point, we were seeing all positive results.
What, if any, next steps did you take after submitting OCAMA5 for FDA approval?
So the next step after that would be to begin to compile a list of potential candidates to participate in the human trials once approval came down.
From your experience as a scientist for over 22 years, are you familiar with FDA procedures as it pertains to approving drugs?
Yes, from the applicant's perspective.
And from that experience, is it typical to compile a list of potential candidates prior to FDA approval?
It's standard practice.
What, if any, steps did you take to compile a list of potential candidates?
I figured that the best place to start compiling a list would be with the chief of oncology at Central City Hospital, who happens to be a friend of mine, Dr. Strike. So I visited Dr. Strike.
And what, if anything, happened during your meeting with Dr. Strike?
I shared generally what we were seeing with the results, how we were seeing reductions in cancerous cell growth, and just generally the positive trends of OCAMA5 at that point. That was when I requested a list of potential candidates.
And from your perspective, having been in the room that day, how, if at all, did it appear that Dr. Strike reacted upon hearing this great news?
Sustained.
And what happened next during this meeting?
So after I asked for a list of potential candidates who might be interested in participating in the trials, Dr. Strike agreed after obviously obtaining the consent of his patients to provide me their information.
Did you ever receive a list of potential candidates from Dr. Strike?
Yes, on July 29th, my offices received a list.
And what, if anything, did you do after you received this list?
At that point, I tasked my assistant, Frankie Blaine, with contacting the names on that list just to see if they were interested in a screening meeting. Joe Eagle's name was on that list.
Do you typically meet with potential candidates?
Yes, again, this is standard practice.
Why did you want to meet with potential candidates like Mr. Eagle?
It's good just to screen them for any pre-existing or underlying conditions that would disqualify them from participation in the human trials. Something like hypertension, for instance. Dr. Strike mentioned an even playing field. That's exactly what we were trying to do. By no means are we deciding who's actually participating. We're just trying to get a sense of who might be able to once we're approved.
And to your knowledge from having been aware of FDA procedures, does the FDA allow you to begin the candidate process at this stage?
The FDA wouldn't frown on something like that. Again, it's very common.
Based on your own personal knowledge as the individual who created and studied OCAMA5 for 8 years, how could potential candidates like Mr. Eagle have benefited from the technologies you were developing at Star Labs?
It's hard to quantify something like that. I mean, not only would it cure his cancer, but it would prevent him from passing that on to future generations. It's an understatement to say that that's life-changing for someone, and it would have been for him.
Was an appointment with Mr. Eagle ever scheduled?
Yes, we were set to meet with Mr. Eagle on July 30th.
And what, if anything, happened during your meeting with Mr. Eagle on July 30th?
He was in one of our examination rooms. My assistant Frankie was there. We explained a bit about the upcoming trials, how the process works. It was during the course of this meeting that I learned that he hadn't been vaccinated for shingles. And it's important to be vaccinated for shingles. It's a very painful viral infection. So I recommended that he receive the inoculation.
And did he agree?
Yes, he agreed to have it done on site.
Have you given vaccinations at Star Labs before?
Many times. Again, I've been a doctor for 22 years at Star Labs. I've given a lot of shots.
Is Star Labs approved to give vaccinations on site?
Yes, for multiple inoculations, not just the shingles vaccine.
Did you ultimately end up vaccinating Mr. Eagle with the shingles vaccine?
After he consented, yes, I did.
And what was the process you went through to vaccinate Mr. Eagle with the shingles vaccine?
It was typical of what I always do when I administer a vaccine. I went back into our vault, extracted the vial, put it into my syringe, placed the vial back into the refrigerator, went back into the examination room, administered the vaccine, and made sure to note in his medical records that he'd received the shingles vaccine that day.
I have in my hand what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 9A, 9B, 9C, and what has been previously admitted into evidence. I'm showing that to opposing counsel at this time. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing the witness 9A, 9B, and 9C. Do you recognize those photographs?
Yes, I do.
What are they?
The first one is a photograph of two vials. The one on the left is the shingles vaccine. The one on the right is the Ocama 5 drug. The second photo, 9B, is a photo of only the shingles vaccine, and 9C is a photograph of only the Ocama 5 drug.
How do you recognize them to be that?
Well, I created Ocama 5, so I would recognize that anywhere. And then the shingles vaccine I've been working with for a number of years now.
Thank you, Dr. Carlisle. Your Honor, this has already been admitted into evidence, but I would ask that I either republish the jury unless they already have it there. Okay. Moving forward, Dr. Carlisle, which, if any, of these vials did you take out from the refrigerator during your meeting with Mr. Eagle on July 30th?
So I took out 9B, that's the shingles vaccine.
What is the vial pictured to the right of Exhibit 9A, and that's shown on 9C?
That is Ocama 5, the darker one.
How do you know it to be that?
Well, again, I created it, and the color is distinctive.
What is distinctive about the color to you?
Well, if you look at them next to each other, the one on the left, the shingles vaccine, is a much lighter shade of orange, whereas the one on the right, the Ocama 5 drug, is much darker.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any cross-examination of the defendant?
Good evening, Dr. Strike. My name is Lillian Hahn, and I just have a few questions for you this evening. Sure. Or, did I just call you?
My name is Dr. Carlisle.
Carlisle, I apologize.
It's okay. It's been a long night.
I apologize. Now, you've been working as a scientist doing genetic research and pharmaceutical developments for the last 22 years, you said?
Yeah, I'm primarily genetics, not so much pharmaceutical developments, but yes.
And most recently, you've been working on the development of your new drug called Ocama 5.
Yes.
And this drug is supposed to allegedly cure inheritable cancers, correct?
That's the idea, yes.
How many drugs have you worked on developing in the past over the last 22 years?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Well, it's cross-examination. I'll allow it.
I don't know that I could tell you offhand. There's been a number of them, both, I'm not always the lead on every project. I couldn't tell you offhand, but a number.
So you are aware of all the processes that need to be followed in terms of obtaining permission from the FDA, starting human trials and all of that?
From the applicant's perspective, yes. I obviously, I don't know what the FDA does internally, but
Would you agree with the fact that the FDA does not let you choose your own candidates for these trials?
you mean like in regards to,
Objection,
don't-
Your Honor, don't believe it's clear from the questioning what is being asked here.
Well, do you understand the question?
can I ask a clarifying question?
Why don't you re-ask the question, if you would?
Would you agree with the fact that the FDA does not let you as the scientist, choose the candidates for your trials?
Objection calls for speculation as to what the FDA would approve or not.
Well, if she knows.
My understanding is that the FDA is deferential to your list of potential candidates, but I can't speak to what the FDA does internally.
But isn't it true that you told officers during your interrogation with them that the FDA in fact does not let you choose your own candidates?
Well, certainly they're not going to rubber stamp a list that I create.
So the FDA does not let you choose individual candidates for your personal studies, yes or no?
Not technically, no.
Now, Star Labs has had an issue before with a drug treatment that had not made it fully through FDA approval. Is that correct?
I can't really speak to that. I know there was an issue, but that's really the extent of my knowledge on the subject.
Do you recall your interview with police officers when you explicitly told them that Star Labs had an issue with running trials for a drug treatment for a drug that had not been approved yet?
Objection, Your Honor, mischaracterization of the evidence.
I'll sustain the objection. If you want to ask the particular witness if they made a particular statement, we can do that. Others and not characterize what it is.
Dr. Carlisle, is it true that you told officers there was an issue with Star Labs a few years ago about a drug treatment that did not make it through full FDA approval?
Objection, Your Honor, there's a lack of foundation here. We're speaking about a document that I believe has not been administered into evidence, and there's been no foundation laid as to what that document is.
Your Honor, I'm simply asking the witness about a previous statement that she has made.
I understand the objection is overruled. You may answer the question.
Sure. Yes, as I stated a few minutes ago, I know there was an issue, but that's really all I know.
Now, I want to direct your attention to your meeting with Dr. Strike. What information did you share with Dr. Strike regarding OCAMA 5 during this meeting?
Generally the positive results that we were seeing from OCAMA 5.
And you know Exhibit 2, your lab studies report?
Yes, I have it here.
I would like to direct your attention to the heading that says study product dose and mode of administration. The redacted portions under this heading are the chemical compounds of OCAMA 5 that have been redacted, correct?
Yes.
So to this jury and to this court, and for lack of a better term, these are unknown chemicals to us as they are redacted.
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation as to what other people in this room have knowledge of or not.
Sustained.
Would you agree that these are unknown chemicals?
The chemicals are not unknown. The compound is new.
So it's unknown.
Objection, Your Honor, mischaracterization of the evidence.
Well, it's cross-examination. I'll give you a little leeway.
When you say it's new, the compound or the chemicals?
Unknown, not new.
Okay, do you mean the compound or the chemicals?
The chemical compound, so.
So as a compound, it's new, but the individual chemicals, the chemical elements are not new. They come from the periodic table.
I'm not asking you if they're new. I'm asking you simply because they are redacted in this document, are they unknown?
They're not unknown to me. I created it.
So they're only not unknown to you personally.
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation as to what other people know.
Sustained.
Now, during your meeting on July 26th, you asked Dr. Strike to find some potential candidates for you.
Right.
And you also testified here that you were getting a jump on finding these potential candidates and it's not necessarily frowned upon.
Right.
But isn't it true that it's not frowned upon just because you believed that True Genetics was doing the same exact thing?
Not solely. That was a big factor, but it generally isn't frowned upon.
Now, was the victim Joe Eagle one of the candidates that Dr. Strike gave you as a name?
Yes, he was one of 4.
And after receiving this information, your assistant Frankie Blaine reached out to Joe Eagle for a meeting?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
Is Ms. Blaine going to testify?
Yes, she is. I believe this is an out-of-court statement made by someone other than Dr. Carlisle, though.
Well, I'll allow it.
Could you re-ask the question?
So after this meeting and after receiving this information, your assistant Frankie Blaine contacted the victim for a meeting, right?
To my knowledge, yes.
And then on July 30th, 2022, despite having FDA approval, you met with Joe Eagle.
Correct, that morning.
Despite not having approval?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, would you agree that you have knowledge of the victim's most recent medical history form from July 21st, 2022 that has previously been brought into evidence today?
I've seen that document.
And would you agree with the facts contained within that document that those most recent tests done by Dr. Strike showed that the victim was exhibiting signs of good health and improvements, minus the fact that he had his stage 2 cancer diagnosis?
Objection, Your Honor. This document is not in front of the witness. It has not been authenticated by the witness. And there's several questions within that.
I'm going to allow it if she knows what her recollection is, having viewed the document.
Admittedly, I haven't seen the document in a little while, and obviously I'm not the one who performed the tests, so I can't necessarily speak to the methods that Dr. Strike used. I know that what you just said is contained within that report.
So bringing you back to my question, you would agree with the facts contained in the report created by Dr. Strike that Joe Eagle was exhibiting signs of improvement and good health despite his stage 2 cancer diagnosis?
Objection, Your Honor, mischaracterization of the evidence. I believe she stated that it is within that document, but not necessarily that she agreed with it.
Well, I understand the objection. I'll allow you to answer the question. But this document's in evidence, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
I agree that that's within the document. I don't personally feel like I can speak to whether or not it's accurate. I wasn't present when Dr. Strike performed the examination, but that's within that document, and I've seen the document.
Now, you also testified that the first step in your research with this drug in actually using it is to first extract DNA from a patient, correct?
Extracting the cancerous cell DNA, yes.
And you drew blood from the victim during his visit in your office on July 29, 2020, is that correct?
We did a blood analysis, yes.
Now, Ocama-5 is a drug that's administered intravenously by use of a syringe, right?
Well, yes, but Ocama-5 isn't injected directly into the patient. It's directed into the sample that we extract.
Redirecting you back to my question, you use a syringe to make an injection of Ocama-5, yes?
Yes, I just want to be clear that it's not an injection of Ocama-5 directly into the patient.
Now, where is Ocama-5 stored in your lab?
In the vault.
Where within the vault is it stored?
In the refrigerators.
Which refrigerator?
I don't know that I could tell you offhand. I haven't been in there since all of this started.
So you don't know where your own drug is stored within your lab, even though you've been working on it for the last 4 years and spent every day?
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Well, it is, but I'll allow it.
I will re-ask the question.
Thank you, Counselor.
So you stated you don't know which fridge it belongs in, even though you have been working on the creation of this drug every day for the last 4 years?
Well, I mean, they could have moved it since I've been there. I can't speak to that. I haven't been allowed back in several months at this point.
At the time, on July 30th, 2022, Ocama-5 was stored in fridge C, correct?
At least, yes.
Now, and then you testified that during your meeting with the victim, you injected him with a syringe of orange liquid that you obtained from fridge C, correct?
I
Objection, Your Honor,
testified that I,
mischaracterization of the evidence. She did not state that she injected him with a syringe. I don't believe that was stated today.
Well, it's up to the jury to recall what the testimony was, so I'll allow the question.
I stated that I administered the shingles vaccine, not an orange liquid. The shingles vaccine is orange, but I stated that it was the shingles vaccine.
But it is an orange liquid that was inside of the syringe, correct?
Yes, the shingles vaccine is orange.
Ocama 5 is also orange, correct?
It's dark orange, I would say.
But it's orange.
Dark orange. I know there's been a lot of confusion about dark and light orange, but I believe it's dark orange.
But would you agree that as a whole shade, it was orange?
Yes, it's in the orange family, I would say.
Now, did you take any notes regarding the progress of your research on Ocama 5?
Yes, I did.
And would you recognize those if I were to show them to you today?
Definitely.
One moment, Your Honor. Let the record reflect that I am showing opposing counsel the exhibits that have previously been marked as Exhibit 4A, 4B, and 4D. And I am now approaching the witness with the documents that have previously been labeled as Exhibits 4A, 4B, and 4D. Now, Dr. Carlisle, do you recognize these documents?
Yes, these are my data log entries for Ocama 5.
And are they in the same condition as the last time you've seen them?
Yes,
There's been no changes, no alterations, no deletions,
no,
and you are in fact the author of these notes,
yes, I am.
and you created them throughout the regular course of your business and research for Ocama 5, correct?
Correct.
And similar to Exhibit 4B, everything else is the same with these as it was with that one, which was another journal entry of yours?
You mean 4C, the one?
Yes, 4C, my
Yes.
apologies.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to move the remainder of Exhibit 4 into evidence, specifically 4A, 4B, and 4D.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, those are admitted.
Now, starting with Exhibit 4A, these notes indicate that Ocama 5 showed signs of clotting upon reintegration, despite the fact that there were no equipment malfunctions. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. They showed minimal blood clotting after reintegration.
So they showed signs of clotting upon reintegration.
I think there's a difference between blood clotting and minimal blood clotting.
But would you agree that contained in these notes, it states that there were signs of blood clotting upon reintegration? Yes or no, Dr. Carlisle?
No, it was minimal blood clotting. I'm sorry. There's a difference between minimal and regular blood clotting.
So it's your testimony today that that document does not say that there was blood clotting?
It's my testimony that it says there was minimal blood clotting after reintegration.
So I fail to understand, that document says that there are signs of blood clotting, yes?
Minimal, yes.
Moving on, I'll draw your attention next to Exhibit 4B. Is it true that your notes for this exhibit indicate that the drug had been failing and was still exhibiting these signs of clotting upon reintegration?
Objection, Your Honor. Compound question.
I'll allow it.
I believe it says there was a failed reintegration, not that the drug as a whole was failing.
And there were still signs of blood clotting.
Minimal clotting.
Now, I would like to finally draw your attention to Exhibit 4D. Would you agree that the final sentence of this entry states, "I don't know how much longer I can wait to make history"?
I wrote that. I was excited.
Your Honor, at this time, I have no further questions for this witness, and I will be retrieving the exhibits 4A, 4B, and 4D.
All right, very good. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Carlisle, do you still have Exhibit 4D in front of you?
I do not.
Do not. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
I'm handing the witness what has been pre-marked and pre-admitted into evidence as Exhibit 4D. During your cross-examination, you read from that last line there. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Sure. So I wrote about how I didn't know how much longer I could wait to make history. At that point, we had just submitted for FDA approval after having the really positive results that we saw in Exhibit 4C, and I was excited. Obviously, I was never going to jump over steps in FDA approval. I would never administer this drug to anyone. I'd been
Sustain.
Your Honor, may I ask what the objection was sustained for so that I can know how to proceed?
Just do a follow-up question. She's giving a narrative at this point in time, so why don't you just give a follow-up question to direct the answer?
I believe you were just speaking about OCAMA 5. Can you explain further what the relation is of this statement to how you would proceed forward with OCAMA 5?
certainly. I'd been working on OCAMA 5 for 8 years. That's a long time. I wasn't going to throw all of that work out the window now by jumping forward before approval came down. We were meeting the efficacy levels. Approval was going to be forthcoming. I would never jeopardize that by moving ahead in the process improperly.
Thank you, Dr. Carlisle. No further questions. Your Honor, may I approach to retrieve those documents?
Yes, you may. Any recalls on that issue?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Dr. Carlisle, that marks the end of your testimony. You may step down. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Does the defense have any further witness they wish to call?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense would like to call this week. It's Frankie Bowling.
Okay, fine.
Who's raising right hand? You swear to tell the truth of what you're going to say?
I do.
You see.
Good evening. Hi. Could you please state your name for the record?
My name is Frankie Blaine.
And how old are you, Ms. Blaine?
I'm 24 years old.
And what type of education did you receive?
So I graduated with a bachelor's in management in 2020, but I also minored in biology.
And are you currently employed?
I am. I work for Star Labs as in the genetics division as Dr. Carlisle's assistant.
And is she your direct supervisor?
She is. I've been very excited to work with her. Her work ethic is infectious and she is very passionate about her work.
And is this your lifelong career plan to be Dr. Carlisle's assistant?
No, while I do love it, I would like to go to medical school myself and become a doctor someday. So in this capacity, in the clerical work that I do, no, but you know, maybe someday as a doctor.
So is this job kind of like a gap year before med school?
Sure, I think it's a really good learning opportunity for me. And it's a way for me to make money before going to medical school.
And you have to submit an application to med school?
Yes, I do.
And what types of things would you have to submit in your application to med school?
Just generally letters of recommendation, my MCAT score, my grades from college, things like that.
And did you want to get experience before med school?
Yes, I thought that that was essential and I think that it would make me unique among other applicants. Plus, I thought that, you know, working for someone like Dr. Carlisle and the work that she was doing would also be something really cool to have on my resume.
And do you believe that working for Dr. Carlisle would jeopardize your admittance into med school in any way?
No,
And do you know if Dr. Carlisle was working on any special project during the time that you were employed at Star Labs?
yes, I knew that she was working on a drug specifically focusing on DNA and cancer-causing cells and removing those cancer-causing cells from the DNA so that it would essentially be a cure to cancer. And it would also prevent that person from passing it on to future offspring, which was really exciting.
And did you, as Dr. Carlisle's assistant, did you have any special duties pertaining to that project?
Really, anything that she needed me to do. I would do some minor research. I would draft memoranda. I would contact people. I would sit in on meetings that she had and take notes. A lot of it was clerical.
And were you in Star Labs on July 29th, 2022?
I was.
And what did you do when you first arrived, if you can recall?
I met with Dr. Carlisle to discuss how far along we were as far as that new drug that she was producing that would hopefully cure cancer.
And how did that conversation go?
So I knew that at that point, we were pretty far along in the FDA process. And it was my understanding that we were about a week or so away from approval. We knew that our efficacy, we met the efficacy threshold that the FDA requires of 70%. So we were pretty confident.
So if you were submitting this drug for FDA approval, did that mean that your tasks pertaining to this drug were complete?
No, I had a lot of tasks just sort of to lay that foundation so that if it were approved, we would have a smooth start.
So what other types of assignments did you receive then, going forward?
So that day specifically, Dr. Carlisle asked me to call 4 candidates or potential candidates for OCAMA 5, just so that we could talk to them and see if they would even be eligible should we get approval.
And did you call those candidates?
Yes, I decided to call them that day. I'd gotten all my work done. So I called all 4 and only 1 answered.
Did Dr. Carlisle instruct you to call those 4 candidates on that day that you were assigned to do that?
No, it was just generally an instruction to get it done at some point. The only pressure was internal pressure for me. I like to get things done and I like to do things by the book. So I think get things done as soon as possible.
Did you feel any pressure to complete that outside of your own internal work ethic?
Outside of my own internal work ethic, absolutely not.
Moving on to July 30th, 2022, were you in the lab that day?
I was.
And what did you do?
So one of the potential candidates had agreed to come in to just speak with us preliminarily, with us being me and Dr. Carlisle. So I was getting ready for that meeting. And once we went in there, they did the typical tests and stuff like that. But my job was really to take down and take notes of what happened during that meeting. And that's what I did.
And do you remember the candidate that came in?
Yes, it was Joe Eagle.
And was Joe Eagle one of the candidates that you called the prior day?
He was the only one that answered.
And was, to your knowledge, was there FDA approval for OCAMA 5 at that point?
No, there was not. We had anticipated that it would come, but it was definitely not approved at that point. No.
So was Mr. Eagle there as an actual candidate for the human trials for OCAMA 5?
No, he was not. He was really a potential candidate to be a potential candidate at that point. We just needed to have, if he were to be accepted, which was way far off in the future for us, we would just want to have an initial medical history and things like that. And he seemed interested.
You were present for the duration of that meeting with Dr. Carlisle and Mr. Eagle?
I was.
And how did that go generally?
So we did everything that was pretty typical of a doctor's visit. So blood and urine analysis, like you would at any preliminary doctor's meeting or doctor's appointment when you go to a new doctor's office. And then we also discussed medical history so we could have that on file.
Back one bit. When you called Mr. Eagle, was your impression at all that he was surprised by your phone call?
No, he didn't seem at all surprised when he answered the phone.
And how is that your impression?
He seemed to expect my call. I told him what it was
Objection, Your
about.
Honor. As to Mr. Eagle's expectations or emotions when he received the call.
Sustained.
Moving forward to the meeting with Dr. Carlisle and Mr. Eagle on July 30th. Did you document everything during that meeting?
I did, yes.
And is that part of your normal duties as Dr. Carlisle's assistant?
Yes, it is.
And you do not have a medical degree, correct?
Not yet.
What is your degree in?
My degree is in management, but I did minor in biology just to get the prerequisites for medical school.
And during that meeting, you mentioned kind of like what was happening, but what types of things did you actually document during that meeting?
So I documented any of the questions that Dr. Carlisle asked, any of the answers that Joe Eagle gave, and then also what the results of the blood and urine analysis were very generally, and then also what the medical history was.
When you were documenting these things, withdrawn. When you were documenting throughout this meeting, did Dr. Carlisle instruct you when to document something?
No, I know which parts are relevant. It's very easy to tell which parts I need to write down. Obviously, greetings, I don't need to write down, but I do need to write down medical history and results of tests, things that we would want to keep track of.
So the notes that you create for that meeting, that's based on your own observation?
Completely based on my own observation, yes.
And were there any tests conducted during that meeting?
Yep, so just blood and urine analysis, and then we just went through the medical history.
And was there any discussion about the potential human trials for OCAMA 5?
Yes, we talked about what OCAMA 5 was, how it was made, what it would do. But it was very generally, he was only a potential candidate at that point. So we were speaking about it very generally and what would happen if in the situation that he was accepted as a candidate.
And from your observations during that meeting, was there anything conveyed to Mr. Eagle indicating that he was a formal accepted candidate?
No, because he wasn't.
And to your knowledge, did Dr. Carlisle ever formally accept candidates before human trials were approved?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And you mentioned a medical history exam. Could you explain a little bit what happened during that exam?
So everything was going pretty well until we reached the shingles vaccine. Mr. Eagle had just had a birthday, so he had sort of missed that time when you're supposed to get a shingles vaccine. He likely would have gotten it at his next doctor's appointment or something, but Dr. Carlisle explained how important it was to stay up to date on vaccinations and offered to give that shingles vaccine day of.
So what happened next?
So Mr. Eagle consented to getting the shingles vaccine that day, and Dr. Carlisle went to go get it.
So to clarify, did Dr. Carlisle offer to administer the shingles vaccine?
She did.
On the date of July 30th, 2022, was Jamie Carlisle a doctor?
Yes.
To your knowledge, are doctors approved to inoculate patients with FDA-approved vaccines?
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for speculation.
I think the doctor already testified that she was, so I'll allow it.
She was.
And to your knowledge, is the shingles vaccine FDA approved?
It is.
Your Honor, for the record, I am handing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 6 for identification. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Blaine, I'm handing you what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 6. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
These are my notes from that visit on July 30th.
And are they altered in any way from what you can tell?
No, they are not.
Your Honor, I would like to move Exhibit 6 into evidence at this time.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, those are admitted.
Your Honor, may I publish Exhibit 6 to the jury?
You may.
And note for the record that this is a fair and accurate copy of Exhibit 6. Ms. Blaine, you previously just stated that Mr. Eagle provided consent to receive the shingles vaccine.
Yes,
And is that documented anywhere on your notes?
it is. It's in the second to last sentence.
Could you read that for the record?
Informed consent received to inoculate with shingles vaccine.
And that was based on your own observations within the meeting?
Yes, it was.
And did you witness the actual inoculation of the shingles vaccine into Mr. Eagle?
I did.
And did you see the actual syringe that was used?
I did, yes.
Did you see, were you able to see the actual liquid contents that was within the syringe?
Yes,
And can you describe that in a color of any way?
it was orange in color.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, I have what is marked, what has been entered into evidence as 9A, B, and C.
Okay.
I'm handing you, Ms. Waters, what has been marked as exhibits 9A, B, and C.
Mhm.
Do you recognize these documents?
I do.
And what are they?
So these are photos of the vials that we have in some of the refrigerators at Star Labs.
And how do you recognize it to be that?
I've worked at Star Labs for a while and I know what these look like.
Looking at 9A, can you tell which one is the shingles vaccine?
Yes, I can.
Okay, could you point to which one that is?
It's this one on the left, the lighter one.
And looking at 9B, do you recognize this specific vial 9B?
Sorry, yes, I do. This is also the shingles vaccine. It's just the shingles vaccine by itself,
And what color is that?
light orange.
And did you state previously correct that you observed an orange liquid in the syringe that Mr. Eagle was inoculated with?
Yes, this orange liquid.
No further questions, Your Honor. I will leave what has been marked as exhibits 6 and 9A through C with the witness.
In cross-examination? Counsel?
Good evening, Ms. Blaine, or may I proceed?
Yes, you may, absolutely.
Good evening, Ms. Blaine.
Good evening.
I just have a couple questions about what you just testified to on direct examination.
Sure.
So it was your testimony that you witnessed the shingles vaccine get injected into Joe Eagle, is that correct?
Nope. It was my testimony that I saw Joe Eagle get inoculated with a orange liquid.
Okay, so for clarification, can you be absolutely certain that the day in question, Joe Eagle received the shingles vaccine?
No, I didn't say that. I said that this is the shingles vaccine. And that what I saw Joe Eagle be inoculated with was light orange in color.
So that's a no to my question. You cannot be certain that Joe Eagle got the shingles vaccine.
No, I can't be certain.
Thank you. So you're the one that picked Joe Eagle for the human trials, is that correct?
No.
You were not the one to choose Joe Eagle.
Nobody was chosen for the human trials yet.
You were not the one to reach out to Joe Eagle.
I was instructed to call Joe Eagle and I did.
And did you make contact with Joe Eagle?
Yes,
And he came in for a potential human trial candidate preliminary examination.
he just came in for a preliminary examination. I wouldn't say it was a potential candidate preliminary examination.
So what was the preliminary examination for, if not to be a potential candidate for a human trial?
He was a potential candidate. We hadn't even received approval yet.
Again, what was the preliminary examination for, if not to be a potential candidate for a human trial?
It was to gather his medical history and records so that if it were approved and if we decided to take him as a candidate, we would be able to hit the ground running because we would have his information on file already.
So you would be able to have his information as a potential candidate, correct?
Sure.
Okay. So after you first initially spoke with Joe Eagle, he was very eager, correct?
I would say so. Yes, he was excited.
And during the meeting, Dr. Carl realized that Joe was not up to date on his vaccination. Is that correct?
Yes,
And then Dr. Carlisle offered to give Joe Eagle the shingles vaccine, correct?
right.
And this was to avoid any needless delay.
Yeah, if we were approved by the FDA and if he was chosen as a candidate.
So that is a yes, my question. Dr. Carlisle gave the vaccine to avoid any needless delay, correct?
With those two ifs, yes.
And Joe accepted the vaccine without protest, correct?
He consented.
And the vaccine was given at the research facility, correct?
It was.
And was anyone else present in the room besides you and Dr. Jamie Carlisle at that time?
No.
So before the inoculation, did you go with Dr. Jamie Carlisle to get the shingles vaccine or did you remain in the room?
Nope, I stayed in the room.
So did you see Dr. Jamie Carlisle get the shingles vaccine from the refrigerator?
No.
Did Dr. Jamie Carlisle come into the room with a pre-filled syringe?
Yes, she did.
So did you see what Dr. Jamie Carlisle put in the pre-filled syringe prior to entering the room?
No, I never said I did.
So has your research facility ever administered a vaccine on the first meeting with a candidate?
I'm sure we have, yes.
Can you be absolutely certain?
I mean, we've had millions, well, not millions, obviously dozens of meetings. I can't be sure, but we've administered them before. I can't be positive it was on the first meeting or not.
Okay, so that's a note to my question. You cannot be sure that this has ever happened on a first basis before,
Mm.
correct?
Not completely sure, no.
So I believe exhibit 6 was already admitted into evidence, correct? You still have that before you?
I do, yeah.
And can you please look at the second to last sentence in the notes from the visit?
Yep.
Or, I apologize, the last sentence.
Okay.
And the last sentence reads, Dr. Carlisle brought in syringe pre-filled to the room that the inoculated patient before sending the patient home. Is that correct?
And inoculated patient before sending the patient home, yes.
So you have, even though the colors, you recall that the colors are similar, between Okama 5 and the shingles vaccine, you have no way of being absolutely certain that Joe Eagle was given the shingles vaccine on July 30th. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
That's cross-examination, I'll allow it.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question. Could you ask it again?
So you previously testified that the colors between the vaccines are similar, correct?
They are, yeah.
Regardless of that similarity, you cannot be absolutely certain that Joe Eagle was given the shingles vaccine on July 30th. Is that correct?
Yes, I never said that otherwise.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Any further questions?
Very free direct, Your Honor.
I always worry when attorneys say brief.
Hello, Ms. Blaine.
Hi.
Did you have a medical degree on July 30th, 2022?
I did not.
As Dr. Carlisle's assistant, do you follow her around in the lab?
No, I think she would get very annoyed with me.
Is it common that if Dr. Carlisle needed to obtain a vial, she would have to go into the lab to receive that?
Yeah,
And is it your typical custom to follow her into the lab when she does that?
no, I follow her around enough. She would get annoyed.
And are there any vials of the vaccine in the meeting rooms with patients?
No, there's no need.
So Dr. Carlisle had to go outside into the lab to get that syringe.
It's protocol to keep it in the vault.
And when you are in meetings with Dr. Carlisle, as you write your notes based on your own observations, correct?
That is true, yeah.
And as your job is Dr. Carlisle's assistant, it's limited kind of to clerical stuff.
Yes, because I don't have a medical degree, there's very limited things that I can do there.
And when Dr. Carlisle is going through her process of researching the vials, researching cells, any of that stuff, are you involved in kind of like her day-to-day decision-making on how to move forward, like with the research?
No, I'm not paid that much. And also she definitely doesn't want my opinion because I don't know.
Does she ever consult you when she should apply for FDA approval?
She does not. I'm like the last person she would ask.
Does she typically show you the vial before she puts it in a syringe, before she inoculates a patient?
No,
And do you ever inoculate patients with vaccines?
no, that would be very bad.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Further?
No recross, Your Honor.
So Ms. Blaine, that marks the end of your testimony. You may step down. Do we have any further witnesses on behalf of the defendant?
No, Your Honor. Although though our previous request for judgment of acquittal under the federal rule of criminal procedure 29 was previously not denied, we would like at this time to respectfully request to renew that.
All right. Again, I'm going to reserve on that at this point in time. We've heard from counsel before in this issue, so I'm not going to make a decision. The matter will proceed to closing statements. I'm going to do the jury instructions first, but before we do that, let's take a brief break. Is there anything further?
Yes, Your Honor, just as a matter of the record and for clarity, as far as their motion goes, I know you're reserving your issue, but I would just like to place on the record that the prosecution stands by their original arguments made at the close of our case in chief.
All right, so noted.
Your Honor, briefly, one more housekeeping matter. Could we have the bailiff report the time left for both teams?
That sounds like a plan.
Right, the prosecution has 23 minutes, 50 seconds.
How much?
23 minutes, 50 seconds. The defense has 13 minutes, 11 seconds.
We'll take a 5-minute break and then the jury instructions.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Can everyone please be seated? We're going to continue.
I just had a really difficult time.
The first time.
Ladies and gentlemen, gosh, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You may.
She got scared.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, at this point in time, the proof is closed. You're about to hear closing statements from the government and from the defense counsel. Before the closing statement, I want to instruct you as to the law, so that you have that and hear the closing statement. For murder and second degree, under New Scotland law, the person is guilty of murder in the second degree when, under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life, he or she recklessly engages in conduct which creates a grave risk of death to another person and thereby causes the death of that person or a third party. The following terms used in that definition have a special meaning. A person recklessly engages in conduct which creates a grave risk of death to another person when he or she engages in conduct which creates a grave and unjustifiable risk that another person's death will occur, and when he or she is aware of and consciously disregards that risk, and when that grave and unjustifiable risk is of such nature and degree that disregard of it constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of conduct that a reasonable person would observe in the situation. Reckless conduct that results in death, however, is not enough to constitute this crime. And that is true no matter how grave or substantial the risk of death was. To constitute this crime, the evidence must also show that the defendant acted under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life. The fact that taking the life of another can itself, in a sense, be considered a depraved act does not, however, turn every killing into depraved indifference murder. Depraved indifference to human life refers to a person's state of mind in recklessly engaging in conduct which creates a grave risk of death. A person has a depraved indifference to human life when that person has an utter disregard for the value of human life. A willingness to act, not because he or she means to cause grievous harm to the person who is killed, but because he or she simply does not care whether or not grievous harm will result. In other words, a person who is depravedly indifferent is not just willing to take a grossly unreasonable risk to human life. That person does not care how the risk turns out. So in order for you to find the defendant guilty of this crime, the people are required to prove from all the evidence in this case, beyond a reasonable doubt, each of the following three elements. One, on or about July 30th, 2022, in the county of Meta, the defendant, Jamie Carlisle, caused the death of Joe Eagle. Two, that the defendant did so by recklessly engaging in conduct which created a grave risk of death to Joe Eagle. And three, that the defendant engaged in such conduct under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life. If you find that the people have proven beyond a reasonable doubt each of these three elements, you must find the defendant guilty of this crime. If you find that the people have not proven beyond a reasonable doubt any one or more of those elements, you must find the defendant not guilty of this crime. Let me talk about a lesser included offense. I'm submitting for your consideration the offense of manslaughter in the second degree, which is not mentioned at the beginning of the trial. That crime is called a lesser included offense of murder in the second degree. As a result, our law requires that the jury consider murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree as follows. You can find the defendant not guilty of both charges or guilty of one of the two charges. Thus, you must consider murder in the second degree and render a verdict of guilty or not guilty. If your verdict is guilty, you will not consider manslaughter in the second degree. If your verdict is not guilty, then you will consider manslaughter in the second degree. Under our law, a person is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree when that person recklessly causes the death of another person. The following terms used in that definition have a special meaning. A person acts recklessly with respect to a death when that person engages in conduct which creates or contributes to a substantial and unjustifiable risk that another person's death will occur, and when he or she is aware and consciously disregards that risk, and when that risk is of such a nature and degree that disregard of it constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would observe in that situation. So in order for you to find the defendant guilty of this crime, the people are required to prove from all the evidence in the case, beyond a reasonable doubt, both of the following two elements. One, that on or about July 30th, 2022, in the county of Meta, the defendant, Jamie Carlisle, caused the death of Joe Eagle, and two, that the defendant did so recklessly. If you find the people have proven beyond a reasonable doubt both of those elements, you must find that the defendant is guilty of this crime. If you find that the people have not proven beyond a reasonable doubt either one or both of those elements, you must find the defendant not guilty of this crime. All right, with that being said, does the defense wish to deliver a closing statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. May it please the members of the jury, the court, and counsel. Thank you for your time and attention this evening. As mentioned previously, my name is Deana DiBenedetto, and I, along with my co-counsel, Ms. Allison Magnarelli, represent the defendant, Dr. Jamie Carlisle, in this matter. After hearing all of the facts, you are now faced with the important decision of deciding whether the defendant Dr. Jamie Carlisle on or about July 30th, 2022, in the city of Central City and the county of Meta, under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life, recklessly caused the death of Mr. Joe Eagle by injecting and inoculating Mr. Eagle with an unapproved drug. Now, throughout today's trial, the prosecution has been tasked with proving this to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that the prosecution must have convinced you, the jury, that there is no other reasonable explanation that can come from the evidence that was presented at trial today. As previously mentioned, there are 3 elements to the crime charge. 1, that on or about July 30th, Dr. Carlisle caused the death of Mr. Eagle. 2, that Dr. Carlisle did so by recklessly engaging in conduct that created a grave risk of death to Mr. Eagle. And 3, that Dr. Carlisle engaged in such conduct under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life. What you will ultimately find is that the prosecution has not met its burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Dr. Carlisle is at fault for Mr. Eagle's death. During today's hearing, the prosecution first called Dr. Taylor Strike to the stand. Dr. Strike testified today that he was well aware that Dr. Carlisle's goal in life was to cure cancer, to help people, not hurt people. The prosecution tried to argue this evening that Dr. Carlisle was doing something wrong by speaking with potential candidates. Picture again that Jenga tower referenced during opening statements. When we pull out this block from the prosecution's Jenga tower and analyze it further, we see that Dr. Strike admitted during his cross-examination today that taking the step before approval is not unheard of, weakening the prosecution's tower. I will take a moment again to remind you of the burden of proof the prosecution has to prove their case to you, beyond a reasonable doubt. Yet Dr. Strike's testimony today has created nothing but doubt. The only thing proven by Mr. Eagle's autopsy report admitted into evidence today as Exhibit 1 is that there is reasonable doubt as to what the actual cause of Mr. Eagle's death was. The prosecution would have you believe that Mr. Eagle was a healthy individual. However, as was clearly shown today through the testimony of Dr. Strike, as well as through the findings of Exhibit 1, the autopsy report, and Exhibit 5, the medical history form, Mr. Eagle was anything but a healthy individual. Exhibit 5 indicates that Mr. Eagle had a malignant tumor, which, as admitted by Dr. Strike today, grows quickly and has the potential to spread to other parts of the body. Additionally, prior to ever meeting Dr. Carlisle, Mr. Eagle was suffering from invading cancerous cells, a stage 2 cancer diagnosis, debilitating chemotherapy side effects, claw marks to his body, and the overuse of alcohol, all of which can interfere with the body's normal functions, including the body's blood clotting process. Further, as you heard from Dr. Strike himself this evening, the evidence indicates that the blood clotting that resulted in Mr. Eagle's stroke could have been caused by a number of things. Notably, the claw marks to his body can increase the blood cell clotting in his body, or his overuse of alcohol can interfere with the blood clotting process. There are also numerous other causes of blood clots and strokes. The world of possibilities for what could have caused Mr. Eagle's death is near infinite and creates reasonable doubt as to the cause of Mr. Eagle's death. That is likely the reason that the autopsy report deemed Mr. Eagle's death inconclusive. Inconclusive, meaning that testing failed to show the cause of Mr. Eagle's death. We don't have answers, we don't have certainty, but we don't need to know what caused Mr. Eagle's death. Instead, all that needs to be determined this evening is whether the prosecution has met their burden of showing beyond a reasonable doubt that Dr. Carlisle was the cause of Mr. Eagle's death. The prosecution next called Sam Waters to the stand today. Sam Waters is the only individual that the prosecution has called to the stand in hopes of producing a supposed eyewitness. But as Sam Waters admitted during her cross-examination today, her actions were driven by her own self-motivated desires to get a promotion at True Genetics, a direct competitor of Star Labs. To achieve this, Sam lied to Star Labs so that she could gain access to Star Labs data, experiments, and research. As an employee of True Genetics, Sam Waters has nothing to lose, but everything to gain from accusing Star Labs of these allegations. I ask of you, can we trust the testimony of this individual? Is the Jenga tower still standing steadily? Is it not at all shaken by her testimony today? Further, I ask of you to consider whether Sam Waters even saw anything of value on July 30th. She testified today that she saw Dr. Carlisle holding a syringe with an orange liquid in it, but was only observing out of her peripheral, cannot be sure what fridge this liquid came from, cannot be sure which vial Dr. Carlisle obtained this liquid from, and couldn't read the label. And it very well could have been the shingles vaccine that Dr. Carlisle inoculated Mr. Eagle with, which is also orange in color, as seen today in the photograph of this vial that was admitted into evidence today as Exhibit 9, Section B. From the testimony of Dr. Strike and Sam Waters, has the prosecution convinced you beyond a reasonable doubt? Dr. Jamie Carlisle also took the stand today. Dr. Carlisle has dedicated 22 years of her life to working as a scientist at Star Labs. And most notably, she spent the last 8 years of her life researching and developing OCAMA-5, a drug that had the potential to cure cancer, not just now, but for generations to come, saving countless human lives. During her direct examination today, Dr. Carlisle explained to us the science and technology behind OCAMA-5. As she explained, and as also indicated in the mode of administration section of Exhibit 2, the lab studies report, if OCAMA-5 were to ever be approved to enter the human trials phase, the technology would require that the cancerous DNA first be extracted from a person, rewritten to remove the cancer, and only then would that DNA be injected and reintegrated into the body. Let me say that again. Extraction, then only later would anything be injected into the body. Thus, the prosecution's argument that Dr. Carlisle injected Mr. Eagle with OCAMA-5 does not even align with how OCAMA-5 would be administered to a patient if it were to be approved, as the first step would not involve injecting an individual with anything at all. Dr. Carlisle's lab studies of OCAMA-5 and data log entries admitted into evidence today as Exhibits 2 and 4 both indicate the meticulousness with which she undertook in conducting her studies. She waited patiently and continued to work on OCAMA-5 for at least 8 long years, conducting over 500 studies. Further, Dr. Carlisle did not submit her paperwork to the FDA for approval until her studies showed only positive results, as evidenced today in Exhibit 4, Section C, Dr. Carlisle's data log dated July 21st, 2022. Dr. Carlisle testified that it was only after she met the requirements needed for the FDA to approve the human trials of OCAMA-5 and after OCAMA showed only positive results that she even applied for FDA approval. While the prosecution would draw special attention to the fact that Dr. Carlisle offered to administer a shingles vaccine, Dr. Carlisle's administering of a vaccine is far from strange. Again, I'm sure we've all been to the doctor's office before and been told we are not up to date on a vaccination. Star Labs is an approved vaccination site for multiple inoculations. And as you heard Dr. Carlisle explain today, it's a normal practice for Star Labs to administer vaccinations on site. Finally, Frankie Blaine, an assistant at Star Labs, took the stand today. You heard today that Frankie Blaine was the only other person in the room with Dr. Carlisle during her meeting with Mr. Eagle and Star Labs on July 30th. She testified that it was a typical meeting with standard medical tests. Again, all the things we probably see when we go to the doctor's office. Further, during this meeting, Frankie Blaine witnessed Dr. Carlisle explain Mr. Eagle what he should expect if he was chosen as an accepted candidate, but that Mr. Eagle was only informed that he was a potential candidate. In fact, Mr. Eagle was never told that he was an accepted candidate because the trials did not start yet. From the evidence presented today, it is clear that the tower that the prosecution has attempted to build up today has fallen, and there is nothing but reasonable doubt in this case. Dr. Carlisle did not cause the death of Mr. Eagle. Rather, the world of possibilities for what could have caused Mr. Eagle's death is near infinite, which is likely why the cause of death was proved as inconclusive in the autopsy report, Exhibit 1. Further, Dr. Carlisle was anything but reckless. She researched and developed Ocama 5 for 8 years, waiting till studies showed only positive results before moving forward with FDA approval. Finally, Dr. Carlisle did not evince a depraved indifference to human life. To the contrary, her dream was to save human lives. Accordingly, we ask that you return the only verdict that the evidence supports and the law demands. A verdict deeming that Dr. Jamie Carlisle is acquitted of Penal Code Section 5227 and any lesser offense. Thank you for your time and attention this evening.
All right, thank you, Counselor. Government wish to make a closing at this time?
Yeah.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Members of the jury, Your Honor, opposing counsel, may it please the court. On July 30th, 2022, the defendant, Jamie Carlisle, let her ambitions get the best of her when she gave the victim, Joe Eagle, a shot of Ocama 5 under the guise that it was a shingles vaccine in order to see the effects of her new miracle drug before obtaining proper FDA approval to start human trials. Unfortunately for our victim in this case, this drug was no miracle. It caused a severe blood clot to form in his brain, which led to a stroke and his untimely death at the age of 50 years old. On July 30th, 2022, this defendant proved she has ambition that kills. Now, at the start of tonight's trial, you were prefaced with 2 questions. How is this possible? And how could this have happened? The prosecution has answered these 2 questions this evening for you. Earlier, my co-counselor, Robert Hojnacki, stood before you to offer a preview of the testimony that would be elicited during this trial. And now I stand before you to remind you of some key points from those testimonies to prove that the defendant, Jamie Carlisle, is guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. First, the prosecution called Dr. Taylor Strike to the stand. You heard from Dr. Strike himself. He received early acceptance into medical school, but decided to defer for a year. Dr. Strike was incredibly bright and always ahead at life. The youngest chief of oncology Central City Hospital has ever seen. And he's been doing a wonderful job treating his cancer patients, taking care of them, finding treatment plans that work out for what they need. Additionally, Dr. Strike has known Dr. Carlisle since med school. He knew of her passions and her dreams of one day curing inheritable cancers and how she would continue to work until she could finally come to meet this goal. Now, Dr. Strike was our victim's doctor, and he's been his doctor since our victim was diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer. You heard from Dr. Strike, and it's also taken down in Exhibit 5 that Joe Eagle was doing so well. His recent tests showed that he had a healthy blood flow, which meant there was no signs of blood clotting. He had no organ dysfunctions, and his cancer had stopped growing. It wasn't gone, but it had stopped growing. And these notes are from July 21st, 2022. Now, Dr. Strike also told you how he was surprised to hear of Joe's passing because he was in, for lack of a better term, due to his diagnosis, he was in good health. He was doing better. Additionally, you were given the autopsy report tonight. Dr. Strike was present for the autopsy of Joe Eagle. And most notably, in this autopsy report, there was the findings of unknown chemicals within Joe Eagle's bloodstream. There was no evidence of a shingles vaccine whatsoever. Next, the people called Sam Waters to the stand. Now, Sam Waters is by no means perfect. None of us are. But she came here today and she testified under oath to tell the truth and the whole truth. And she did exactly that. She testified to what she saw on July 30th, 2022. And the defense cannot convince you not to trust Miss Waters just because they don't want you to. You have to decide that for yourself, based on her testimony, based on what you've seen, based on the facts of this case. And the facts that we heard today from Miss Waters was that the drug wasn't FDA approved, but that Star Labs would be moving ahead with their human trials within the next few weeks. Miss Waters was also present at Star Labs on July 30th, 2022, the fateful day when our victim was given this shot of Ocama 5. Miss Waters saw Dr. Carlisle fill a syringe with an orange liquid from what she believed to be fridge C after she herself had gone into fridge C, picked up a vial, and it said Ocama 5. And Ocama 5, as you have heard, is also an orange liquid. Now, the defense also called 2 witnesses to testify before you today, who were the defendant herself and Miss Frankie Blaine. The defense has attempted to paint a very different story before you today, but I'm here to remind you of some testimony that we did hear from those witnesses. First, Dr. Carlisle, a professional in her field for the last 22 years with the goal to cure inheritable cancer, most recently with her invention of Ocama 5. She's been working on this drug for years. Finally, she submitted her paperwork for FDA approval, but she wasn't there yet. It wasn't approved. Now, you also heard her testify to a lab study synopsis in which the chemical compounds of the Ocama 5 drug are redacted. Now, to us, these are unknown. We can't read it. We can't unblock them. We don't know what it says. We don't know. Just like the chemicals that were found in Joe Eagle's bloodstream that were unknown. You heard Dr. Carlisle say that you use a syringe when administering the Ocama 5. And you also heard her testify that Ocama 5 was stored inside of fridge C on July 30th, 2022. You also heard her state that she did a blood test on the victim and withdrew his blood. Now, the victim, or Dr. Carlisle, was attempting to paint the picture that this drug was some success story. All the trials were successful. They were ready for FDA approval. They were ready to start human trials, but the only exhibit that shows that was Exhibit 4C. We have Exhibit 4A, which was presented to the jury, which states that there was minimal blood clotting after reintegration. We have Exhibit 4B, which says there was a failed reintegration. There is minimal clotting again on reintegration. Those 2 exhibits show that Ocama 5 had a major side effect that was consistent throughout trials. And that side effect was blood clotting. Additionally, you heard that Star Labs had had issues in the past with drugs not being properly approved by the FDA. Additionally, in her own words, the defendant said, "I don't know how much longer I can wait to make history." Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, those notes were taken on July 29th, 2022, the day before Joe Eagle went to Star Labs and was given this shot of O-5 by the defendant. Now, I would just like to address some arguments made by the defense in their closing argument. And I want to clarify them for the members of the jury. The defense mischaracterize the condition of the victim at the time. But Dr. Strike has the medical notes that show all these recent tests were showing that Joe Eagle was improving. He was doing better. He was responding well. He didn't have any side effects to his chemo treatment. He was handling those well. No new growth. Healthy blood flow. But the defense wants you to believe that Joe Eagle just happened to pass away on August 4th because he had cancer. Additionally, they pointed out that many things can cause blood clots in a person. And while that's true, they failed to mention that O-5 causes blood clotting as well. Now, members of the jury, the prosecution is aware that we bear the burden of proof in today's trial. And I want to assure you that our Jenga tower of facts is holding strong before you today. It is our responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but not beyond all doubt. We don't have to prove every word that was said during this trial. We don't have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. We must only prove the elements of the charged crime beyond a reasonable doubt as follows. First, that on or about July 30th, 2022, in the county of Meta, the defendant, Jamie Carlisle, caused the death of Joe Eagle. Second, the defendant did so by recklessly engaging in conduct which created a grave risk of death to Joe Eagle. And third, the defendant engaged in such conduct under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life. Now, I want to break those three down for you so you can see the facts presented and how they fit within those elements. So first, Ms. Waters, Ms. Blaine, and Dr. Carlisle all testified today that they were in Star Labs on July 30th, 2022, when these malicious events occurred. Additionally, there was testimony you heard today from the witnesses that established the jurisdiction in this case as being Meta County. So element number one has been proven. It's been satisfied. Next, we must prove that the defendant engaged in reckless conduct, which created a grave risk of death to the victim. And you heard from Sam Waters. She observed Dr. Carlisle going into the fridge, which she believed to be fridge number C, and fill a syringe with an orange liquid. Just prior to that moment, Sam Waters was in that exact fridge with a vial in her hand that was orange, labeled O-5. Additionally, Frankie Blaine was not with the defendant when she filled this syringe. Frankie Blaine's own notes indicate that the defendant returned to the room with a pre-filled syringe. And third, that the defendant engaged in this conduct, evincing a depraved indifference to human life. We all heard it's no secret that this drug was not FDA approved. And it's no secret that the defendant and her lab were starting to gather potential candidates for their trials. And on July 30th, 2022, Jamie Carlisle used this guise of finding potential candidates, this guise of we're just waiting for our FDA approval to go through. And the defendant used OCAMA-5 to test its effects on the victim before she was legally allowed to. And she did so without regard to the victim or any potential consequences that she or Joe Eagle could potentially face. Now, neither the defense nor Mr. Hojnacki and I are able to instruct you on the law in this case. You must solely consider and apply the law to the facts as the judge will instruct you shortly, or as he already has instructed you tonight. Now, members of the jury, we believe that we have reached our burden today. The defendant had put her life's work into creating this drug. And on July 30th, 2022, the defendant proved that she had ambition that kills by injecting our victim with a syringe full of OCAMA-5 before the drug had been approved and without regard for the life and safety of our victim, Joe Eagle. Therefore, the people respectfully request the jury use common sense when analyzing all of the evidence presented before you today and find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have now heard all the evidence. You've heard the closing arguments of counsel. You can retire to your deliberation room, assuming you have one. And tell us when you've reached a verdict. Thank you very much.
It might have.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight, and a big congratulations to the competitors. Actually, can we give them a round of applause? Like, our wonderful presiding judge has stepped into the back room in which he will deliberate with himself while our jurors are out in the hallway deliberating for a jury verdict as well. So just so everybody is aware, the jury verdict has no bearing on the resolution of the competition this season. It is the decision of the judge, but the jury is to add for effect of emulating a real court scenario. But since we have a little bit of time, since it does take a few minutes to deliberate, we're actually going to go through and kind of give some awards out to several different people for their participation in this competition this year. So I'm actually going to grab, you want to zoom out so that they can see the table?
Yes, you can sit.
Okay. Oh, hi. Okay, you can all hear me. So the first set of certificates that we are going to give out represents the students that moved out of the preliminary competition and moved into the place of octo finalists. So, or excuse me, quarter finalists, not octo finalists. I can't math tonight, I guess. So our first quarter finalist, if you are in the room, please come up. If you're not in the room, it will be in your mailbox tomorrow. So our first quarter finalist goes to Olivia Job. Another quarter finalist is Grace Johnson. Zoe Rezitniak, a quarter finalist. Quarter finalist Kelsey Schaefer. Quarter finalist Craig Specht. As well as quarter finalists Dan Richer. For a picture, we will do that. As well as his partner, quarter finalist John McCartan. For him to come down so we could take the picture.
Good job, Dan. Dan. Partner's at the bar right now.
Now we will be moving on to the semifinalist teams. So one of our semifinalists, Tina Thermodam. As well as her partner, Elise Butler. Our semifinalist, Charles Sereno, who is outside in the hallway right now. As well as his partner, Sean Loverdi. Thank you. Sean. Okay, so now we are going to move on to a little bit more of a special award. This is the Best Oral Advocate Awards. So this award is given out based on the competitors' preliminary round scores. So individual competitors within a team gets their own individual score, and then both people on the team, their scores combined to create their team score. The Best Oral Advocate Awards is based on that individual's performance in both of their preliminary rounds. And we do 3 Best Oral Advocates. So in third place of the third best oral advocate this season, I would like to announce Tina Thermodam. Thank you. Take another picture, maybe? Sure. Thank you. Now for our second best oral advocate, it is my pleasure to announce it is Allison Magnarelli. And finally, our award for the best oral advocate this year goes to Deana. That will conclude awards until the judge and jury are ready. So please feel free to mingle amongst yourselves in the meantime.
I would like that. Always be real notifications. Oh, sorry.
All rise.
You may be seated. All right, the record can reflect, we're back in court. Jury's present, the defendant is present. We have a jury foreperson. My understanding that you've reached a verdict.
Yes, the jury has reached a verdict.
All right, and what is the verdict?
We find defendant Dr. Carlisle guilty of second-degree murder.
Damn it. And where's that crowd? I do think I did it. To be fair, I think.
The orange Shanga remains standing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, jury. You're excused. You don't have to be in for a jury for another 6 months or whatever. Wow, that was fun. So congratulations to all of you with regard to that. You know, I did trials for 30 years. It's exhilarating. It's exhausting. Even as a judge, it's like one of those time periods where you're most alive because you have to be, you know, cognizant of everything that's going on. And there's really, my father was a trial attorney. There's a tremendous amount of joy in being a trial attorney. So both teams did a fantastic job. I'd welcome you in my courtroom any day of the week. I hope it was a good experience for you. I mean, really exceptional. Your closing was phenomenal. So, you know, we can talk later. I can give you specific comments. I don't really have anything, you know, anything by way of any negativity. I mean, sometimes the witness goes bad and, you know, but your presentation, your techniques were all exceptionally good, especially the use of the exhibits. You know, that's one thing we find sometimes that younger attorneys can't use prior statements. You know, they don't know how to do it. Obviously, you knew how to do it. I think that's a credit to your faculty advisor. So, and the other thing I just wanted to just say before I announce it is, too, it's a lot of work to do these problems. I mean, and I certainly think it's phenomenal question this year. And I only imagine the amount of hard work that went into it. And I also want to thank all the witnesses. Their ability to recall all this information, to be really, really effective witnesses, I think was phenomenal. So congratulations to all of you. All right, so I have prepared the score sheet. I've done the calculations, we double checked. So it is my privilege to announce the winner, which is the defendant, Team B. Congratulations to you. Your client, however, is remanded. All right, well, let the party begin.
Oh, great.
Thank you, everybody, so much for coming out tonight. Thank